I was digging through some junk while I was home for the holidays, and I ran across this. We had this old vise just laying around, and I decided I would try and fix it up and bring it back for my new workbench. Stick around to see how I got it done. Alright, so I was digging around our basement over Thanksgiving and I ran into this old vise that my dad said I could keep for my new workbench. I think it's in pretty good condition overall, it just needs a little touching up and it will be ready to go. So let's go make it happen. So taking inventory, all the parts are here, the paint's a little chipped, but that's no big deal, and there's a couple small cracks here and there. And then there's this wiggle. But other than that, this is in great condition. I started the process off by wiping things clear with a dust brush and going ahead and trying some acetone to see if I can remove that paint. Now this kind of backfired and ended up making the paint a little bit more uniform, which would be good, except I wanted to get it all off as it may be lead-based. I gave the acetone one more try with a little bit heavier dosage, but again it just kind of spread the paint around. Even though some came off, it was not doing what I wanted. So I moved on to a different tactic and took it all apart and put it in a big pot. Alright, so I've got my old pot here, ready to go ahead and try boiling these in some baking soda to get off this older paint. See how it goes. Once I got the water boiling, I added a couple tablespoons of baking soda and let it simmer. It went on like this for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then I was ready to take it out. And after that, all it took was a little bit of light scrubbing with a wire and nylon brush, and more or less all the paint had come off. We finished cleaning off all the paint from the old vise parts, which means it's time to move on to the next best part about being at home. More tools, in this case, an angle grinder. But even with fun, safety comes first. So we'll put on a face shield and get to work. Now at this point in the grinding, all I was really focusing on was getting rid of the rough spots, the cavities, some of the cracks that had formed, and the parting lines from the original mold. I wanted a uniform surface finish over the entire part, but other than that, I wasn't doing any detail work yet. Also, aren't sparks just fun to look at? I mean, come on. Whew. Alright, that's the majority of the grinding done. The rest of this is going to have to be done with a Dremel, as it's all just really fine detail work, but we now have a nice shiny finish on this part, so happy with it, time to move on to the next step. But before I kept grinding, I wanted to see what these markings were on the outside of the vise. It appears they say Little Town, which would correspond with this foundry that I found this distributor's pricing for online from 1989. And if you scroll a little further down, you can find the number 3 vise, which corresponds exactly to what we see on the vise at home. And it's crazy seeing prices from back then. Only $10.50 for this whole vise? Not bad. Anyway, back to the video. So, using my Dremel, I went ahead and kept grinding. Most of this was kicking up a ton of dust, rust, lead, who knows what. Luckily, I was wearing a mask, but even with that on, it was still quite a lot, and I had to stop every now and then and fully vacuum down the entire shop to make sure things didn't get out of control. Now at this point, I began experimenting with several different, but uniformly wrong ways to make 2 parallel faces. In this case, the 2 parallel faces of the vise. I succeeded in making 2 relatively flat faces individually, but when it came to mating the 2 pieces of the vise together, they were just not nearly as parallel as I needed, or in this case, wanted. I think that's going to be enough for tonight. I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. It's a relatively flat surface, looks decent. The other one's just not quite where I want it yet, quite late. So I'm going to head to bed. Hopefully I can get the other one worked up tomorrow, but if not, we'll see just how much precision I actually want here. I have a new idea, I slept on it. Essentially, I'm going to try sandwiching the grinder with 2 grinding plates, one on either side, right in between the 2 faces of the vise, and then slowly apply pressure so that theoretically they'll even out. We'll see how it goes. Now in principle, I thought this was actually a decent idea. I implemented it as safe as I could, but it could have been better. Alrighty, so we did a little bit better here, but it's still not perfect. I think this is as good as we're gonna get. Alright, coming at you from the edit, just to explain this, I realized at this point in the video I gave up on trying to make the precision vise that I was going for initially. With the angle grinder I had, it just was not going to happen. Really, you need a mill or something a bit more precision oriented to make that work. So I decided to do the best I had with what I could, the best I could with what I have, oof, too much editing, and just go ahead and make a vise that will be just fine for my purposes right now. At some point I'll upgrade, but that's a later video. So for now, I'll let you get back and keep going. So we have finished, thank you. We have finished the grinding section of this video, which means it's time to move on to cleaning the vise and then getting a fresh coat of paint on there that's going to protect it from rust and other harmful things. So the first thing I did was wipe everything down with some acetone, and then I went back with an IPA coated wipe to really get off all that dust and grime, which as you can see, there's a fair bit of. After that, I cracked open my can of primer, gave it a quick stir, and then went ahead and painted both halves of the vise. And before going to the hardware store to get my paint, my dog came and said hi, so I figured I'd share it with you. You're welcome. And while he was sad that I was gone, I was picking out the paint I needed. In this case, I went with a Beyond Navy coat from Behr. I think this will look good on my workbench, and it will also help protect the vise from rust. All right, we're back from the store with the paint, so it's time to go ahead, string these up, and get to painting. Now here you see me using the very technical method of an old cardboard box and some bent clothes hangers. Janky though it may be, this does the job super well in pretty much every case I've had. So while the paint is drying, I want to go ahead and focus on the lead screw here, getting this all polished up, probably sanding off a good bit of this rust, and generally getting it ready for being on my new workbench. So my plan here was to go ahead and chuck the lead screw into my drill, and use that to rotate the part while I was going through a couple different grits of sandpaper. I know this isn't necessarily the best solution, but given what I have available, I think this is going to do just fine. Since the surface finish looked pretty good, I started with a 220 grit sandpaper, but I'll admit I did have a little bit of fun with the wire brush. Getting ready for takeoff here. Hey, you gotta have fun, right? But with that done, I moved up to wet sanding with some 320 grit sandpaper to finish the piece. That's looking pretty good now. I would say that is shiny, not quite original, stainless finish, but definitely better than what we had before. So after letting the paint dry, I took a look at the two main parts of the vise, and overall things look pretty good. They're definitely very blue, a little bit darker in person, but this is about how they look. There's a nice smooth surface finish, and I'm not too worried about things cracking off, so I'm happy with the paint job. And after that, all I had to do was peel off the masking tape that was covering the two faces of the vise, and we were all set to assemble the final device. I first inserted the traveling section into the stationary part of the vise, and then in addition to the original washer here in metal, I also found a second washer out of rubber that would give a little bit of dampening and help reduce some of that wiggle we saw earlier. Then I simply inserted the lead screw into the vise, added the washers, and threaded it through. From here, all I had to do was add the cotter pin, which I tried to do by hand, but ended up needing a little bit of gentle assistance from my hammer. And last but not least, I bent the cotter pin's end just to hold it in place. Now it very quickly became obvious that things were a little bit too stiff. I think part of this was the paint on the inside, so I went ahead and cleaned that out and decided I would add a little lubricant just to get things all greased up. Alright, so I found some lube. This is meant for a bicycle chain, so it's not exactly for the right purpose, but it may do the job, and it's all I had on hand. So what I want to do is apply just a little bit of this right at the base of the threads where it's going into the main body of the vise, and see if this will do the job here. Excuse me. When in doubt, your thumb makes a great tool. And with the lube applied, I went ahead and just worked it through the mechanism a couple times just to evenly distribute it over the entire thread. So just like that, we have a completed vise. It's time to pack it up and send it back to my apartment. And through the magic of editing, we can do it just like that. Hey, that's a nice workbench. So the vise is back home. I think it works pretty well here on my bench. I might move it around a little bit depending on how my workflow goes, but for now, it survived the trip. It's nice and smooth. I think it's gonna do a good job here, helping me build more projects and having a nice sturdy surface that I can clamp to, work on, do a little metalworking if needed, see what happens. If you liked this video, please consider liking and subscribing as it really helps grow the channel. And for those who have done so in the last couple of weeks, I really appreciate all your support. But with that, I will end this video here and I will see you guys in the next one. Stay safe.